So we're done riding for the day, which means it's time to drink a beer and talk about motorcycles. Two of my other favorite things to do. So first off, a beer we have got from Pensacola Bay Brewery, a Riptide Amber Ale. Delicious beer, really cool spot. If you're in Pensacola, make sure you check them out. On the bikes, we're talking setup. So a lot of guys have issues with the bikes being twitchy. They don't understand what suspension settings do, and they have a trouble just kind of setting it up. So today we're going to talk specifically about preload on these bikes. Now, if you're not familiar, when your bike rides pretty flat even, your setup's not bad. It's going to be probably pretty good. Where you run into issues is when your bike rides like this. So what determines that is your weight, the weight of your gear, plus the springs in the bike. And then finally, you've got certain things you can change like preload. So I'm not sure exactly what the rider weight, gear weight rating is for these bikes, but I know that I'm way over that. So the first thing I did was put new springs in this bike. So fork spring, shock spring, you do not want to just put a new shock spring in there, because what will happen is if you have your preload set, your bike's going to be pretty even, or maybe down a little bit in the front. But what will happen is you go into a corner and your bike's going to dive like this. You don't want that. So if you're familiar with, riding dirt bikes off-road, motocross, that sort of thing, setting your sag on your suspension, dudes geek out about that. But here's the deal. You're going to weigh yourself in all of your gear, plus the gear that you're going to wear additionally. So helmet, camelback, usually filled about halfway. And then on adventure bikes, you'll put your luggage and stuff on there too. Then figure out what weight and rate springs you need for the bike. So you'll put those in there first. Now, depending on the load that you put on the bike too, so, sometimes you're just going normal riding, sometimes you're going camping, sometimes you're going to go cross country, so you need a lot more. You're going to adjust your preload settings from there. And also, depending on how aggressively you're riding, you might change your preload from there as well. But what happens when you don't have the preload set right again is the bike's either going to ride stink bugged or it's going to ride choppered out. Well, when it rides choppered out, that's going to take a lot of the weight off the front of the bike, and it's going to make it really twitchy. Now, you might not notice that so much at slow speeds, but you get going 80, 85 miles an hour down the highway. I don't know if you can hear any of the background noise, but I'm in Texas, basically right off of I-10, so I've got to go 85, 90 to get basically anywhere for about 20 miles. And the bike will get really twitchy. It's like you can just bump the bars and you feel like you're going to get head shake on it. Well, I've got different tires on the bike, different PSI, all that sort of thing. I've messed with that a little bit, couldn't figure it out. It's all about preload. Turns out, even with the right springs in this bike, maybe I've put on a few pounds. It happens. But it makes it ride just a little bit choppered out. Now, on dirt bikes, you're going to twist. You're going to first lift the bike up, take the weight off the shock, or off the tires. And then you're going to change the preload ring on there. These bikes, it's a lot easier. You can stick an Allen key in there, crank it a little bit, one way or the other, less or more, and you're pretty much in the money. Now, if you're in a bind, and you didn't hear this from me, but you can also use a big flat blade screwdriver that's on the end of your multi-tool. So if you're out in the middle of nowhere, you don't have like a 10 millimeter Allen or whatever it is, you do have some options. You don't have to unload the back of these bikes to do that. You can just twist it. It's very easy. Now, these bikes do not have detents on the rear preload. So just keep in mind, it's off a number of twists. And underneath your seat, you've got the stock suspension settings. It's going to be on a little sticker in there underneath the seat. So you can reference that if you need to. Now, if your bike's still twitchy, there are a few other things you can check. But on a new bike that hasn't been beat up too bad, you haven't just submerged everything and ridden caked up in mud, you shouldn't have to worry about these things. But you do also have your steering head, and you have bearings inside of that. If those are roached, that can cause some head shake, some instability on the highway. If your steering head nut is too loose, it can do that too. A lot of guys just crank that down. There's really a process that goes behind doing that, and you're just trying to put band-aids on things if you haven't got your suspension set up right. So always get your suspension set up right and then go into that. And then finally, you have two things on the front end down here, really three. You've got wheel bearings. If you're riding through swamps and stuff like that, those go bad. Make sure they stay packed with grease, replace them every now and then. If your front wheel is not trued up, that can cause that sort of thing. Or if the front tire is really cupped, it's got a lot of wear to it, that can make it a little bit unstable on the front end. And then if your forks are just tweaked like crazy, that's another thing you got to look at. But again, If you're riding a well-maintained bike, chances are it's going to be your suspension setup. So you just want to check into that. Make sure you get the right weight springs. Never replace just the rear spring. Replace both at the same time. It's not hard to do. And you can take it to any suspension shop and they'll do it. Slavens Racing has probably the most accurate spring weights and rates on their website. You can check their charts, and then they get them manufactured and tested, so you know you're not going to get a spring that's softer or harder than the rate chart indicates. Sheesh. So one last consideration on these. If you're riding on the street and you're riding off-road, you're probably going to change your tire pressures a little bit. These Motos Tractionator Rouse tires, they have a sweet spot right around 30 psi. You get too far under that, 25 or so, and they do get a little bit more of that twitchiness. They're going to follow the contours of the road and the lines in the road. So if you're noticing that, add a little bit more tire pressure. I would probably not run over 40 for basically anything. Mid to high 30 psi range if you're going to hit a lot of sharp ledges and stuff like that, because you don't want to bend a wheel. That can put you out of action. So if you're going through Colorado, something rocky, faster paced, and you're probably going to catch a rock or a ledge or something like that. Rear tire, I would leave typically around 30. You get into some sandy, silty stuff, you might drop it down a little bit. You're doing a lot of off-road stuff, drop it down 15 or so probably. You might be able to go a little bit lower because these are really hard carcass tires, the Motos Tractionator Rowels are. But then when you get back on the road, you want to make sure you air back up. Really, I'd be more concerned with bending a front wheel or front rim than a rear rim. That's going to be the main kicker, because you're going to plow straight into something, you're going to hit a ledge, go down a pothole, something like that. Usually you've got more force on the front of the bike than on the rear. The rear's kind of going to float over it after that. So those are just a couple of things to keep in mind. A couple of ways that I've found to fix the instability issues on these bikes. Make sure that, bike's in good shape, you've got the right springs in it, and your bike's not rotting choppered out. They don't have a stock sag measurement on these bikes, so you're going to need to play around with it a little bit. But go to the stock preload setting. If it's twitchy, add a little more preload to the shock. If it's still twitchy, add a little more preload to the shock. And then if the bike's diving a lot, under braking, you can add a little more preload to the forks with the adjusters up here. It's a little bit more difficult to do. Sometimes they get a little bit tight, and it helps if you lean the bike on its kickstand and rotate this off there. But anyway, damn good beer, damn good bike. Get out there, twist some grip.